Okay, why don't we come back in combined session? We're discussing. Okay, we're still in the discussion mode. And we'll now have a discussion why don't we hear first from affordability?
Well, with the time we've spent over the last...
You want to please speak into the...
sorry. With the time we've spent over the last week kind of consulting with each other and talking about stakeholders, areas of major focus, and important info to and from these stakeholders, we've noted that with our initial stakeholder list we made a month or two ago, probably 2 months ago at this point, we thought we should add MoDOT in the Department of Aviation to that list because they're going to have money issues related to it as well with realigning roads and sorts of things if we do reconfigure the airport. And the Department of Aviation obviously has a cost impact that we thought. And so we wanted to add them to our stakeholders list. And then to summarize all of our thoughts down, our top 3 major areas of focus are what are the actual costs to build new? What are the costs to manage the issues with only capital improvements to the existing facilities?
Now contrast those two again. So I want to make sure we capture those.
So if we were to build a whole new single terminal airport, what would that really cost be? Because I know there's been several numbers thrown around, and we're curious with contractor input what that cost would be, and then also what would the cost be just to manage the issues we have with the walls and everything underground, just to do the capital improvements that are needed over the existing facilities. So basically, is that going to be $1 billion over 10 years just to manage what we have going on, or kind of understanding the balance there of what the cost to build new and what the cost to maintain is? And then
we had the aviation department's assessment of that, and then we'd be validating that from other sources.
Yeah, that's exactly what we were looking for, kind of validation of what they brought
Right.
to the table, and that would help us really to tell the public and everybody how we see those costs being.
Yeah.
So just for clarification, so point 1 is what is the cost of those 2 options?
Yes.
Maintaining what we have or shifting to the new concept or a new concept?
I had them as each a different area of focus. So like what are the actual costs to build new with like a full detailed study on it or report that we could provide people to actually say, yes, these are the costs. It's not 1.2, it's 900 or, you know.
Right.
Yeah, we know that's not even a number that's even been advanced anymore. That's
Yeah, exactly. And we just wanted something to let people understand that with a document showing what it might be closer
Yeah.
to. And then what are the costs to manage the issues of the capital improvements of existing facilities, kind of in a more, instead of a PowerPoint, something that we could have in like an Excel format that says, here's all the issues and here's year by year finance costs and all the different things to summarize what the actual overall costs of that might be. And then
of a major rehabilitation.
exactly, yeah. We had a hard time thinking of the right word. Is it a retrofit, just maintaining what we have, or how do you, but it sounds like it's more just capital improvements to the existing at this point. And then thirdly, how are these proposed improvements paid for, and making sure that everybody out there understands that, like we're learning, make sure everybody understands that it's not taxes, or is it taxes, or, you know, kind of going through where the exact sources and uses are of a budget for either of these things. So those were what we talked about being our top 3 major areas of focus.
Okay.
And then...
And which stakeholder did you associate that with? Or that just be out, that's just validation around affordability in general?
Yeah, that's more in generally speaking. And then we went through, and I think we had 9 stakeholders that we thought had a pretty major stake in it, and, you know, obviously the citizens of the greater Kansas City area. And we kind of went to what are the questions they're going to want to know from us so we can relay the right information back to everybody.
Okay.
In support of whatever decision is made. And what would we want to know from them? What input do we want from them? So we looked at it from both. What would they ask us and what would we ask them? And so we kind of went through a list of the nine stakeholders and a couple questions with each of them.
Okay.
Would you like me to go through those?
Sure. Just rattle them off, and Bob's going to type them in. Or you can submit them. Bob, you may not be able to get all
I may not get them all, yeah.
In the interest of time, he's not a stenographer.
I'll
why don't you
so I can just read quickly.
Why don't you rattle them off to us?
If I had one of those court reporter machines, I'd be...
Yeah.
So for the citizens of the greater Kansas City area, obviously they're going to want to know, will the cost change for them to fly? That could be parking, airline tickets, vending, lodging, amenities, all the different things. What is the cost impact? And could there be any tax impact to the Kansas City citizens?
Okay. All right. That's good.
Airlines, they're probably going to want to know what this does to their overall cash flow. Does this provide opportunity for them for new business where they could be increasing their revenue? Does the proposed changes create new opportunity for expansions for new flights for them to increase their footprint, I guess? And what are the trends in the airline market, and what does the future of airports look like? So, and the reason that we thought that fell into affordability is if we're going to, whatever the costs are to build something new, we want to make sure that that includes the cost of what we're forecasting in the next 10 years for the standard airport, or that we're not doing something that's just current to now. It's got the infrastructure for Google Fiber or whatever it may be. And then we talked about the FAA and what they're willing to put forth into the deal. Is it time, money? And I think that kind of goes to who pays for things. I think a lot of that will get shaken out there, but that was really the only question we thought, like, what will they pay for? And what support will they give us in either situation, whether it's a capital improvement plan or a new single terminal. The hospitality and travel industry, we thought they're a stakeholder, and we want to know if, from an affordability standpoint, if they'd support it, and do we think this will bring more travelers to Kansas City? Will more businesses stop here? And does this mean more industry overall, or just an increased facility charge? So for the amenities, we get facility charges, I think, on some of those things, is what my understanding is. And is there a possibility for increase in that, which may relate to affordability?
Okay.
Then the cities of the greater Kansas City area, one of the questions we'd want to know is, if needed, would the cities benefiting from this participate in any sort of public finance or airport redevelopment? Because it's not just Kansas City that benefits from this, it's the greater Kansas City area, and all the surrounding cities. So depending on who pays for what, there's that question if we'll get the financial support of everybody else, not just Kansas City. A question for City Council, and this is kind of a very broad general question, and it's because we don't know the answers to everything yet that we ask this, but if there was a shortfall in the airport's ability to pay its debt service for bonds or whatever it may be, would there be someone there to step up and cover that, or how does that happen? I don't know that's ever happened in the history of an airline falling through, but the example was made. No city's ever went bankrupt either until Detroit did. So we were just curious if there was ever a shortfall in debt service, how would that get covered? And I don't know if that'll probably get shaken out throughout the who pays for what and issue, but that was something that we talked about.
Some of these questions you're asking, I would say that we know the answers to from our airport school, and maybe you're just validating. So I don't want to give the impression that because we're asking that question, we think that there is some doubt there. I mean, so what we learned in airport school, that there's a brick wall between the city and the airport funding, and the city is not going to be the backstop. At least we've been told and we've learned the city is not the backstop if there's some kind of fault on the airport bonds, and I think that's been made clear to us by more than one party. So the question is, has there ever been a default? Is that even an option?
Yeah.
And what are the what's the worst side? The worst case scenario as to what happens. But we'd be validating that there's no obligation on the part of the city of Kansas City to step in on any airport bond funding. Okay.
That's what we thought. We just wanted to, we had someone on our committee who wanted to make sure that we validated it, so we
Yeah.
thought that was important to bring up. Key congressional stakeholders, will they support or help us get financing and approval from the FAA, whether it comes to bonds or however they can play into it? Do we have their support? And retail vendors, with the increase in business and profitability, or will this increase your business and profitability, and will you create more revenue from lease terms? But that might be something that falls into the business category and not so much into affordability.
We've got some similar questions
Yeah.
from retailers.
Okay.
And MoDOT was just a simple question: do they incur costs, and how is that covered?
Okay. All right.
That was really, with our stakeholders, those were the major areas of focus that we thought needed to be asked or validated, because some of these were already brought up through airport school.
Okay. Great. Good work.
Thanks, yeah, good work.
Thank you. And actually, we have more now that I'm turning the page. Sorry. Well,
But you're out of time.
yeah. All right. I'm good with that. And then
Well, what other stakeholders do you have left that you haven't mentioned?
Department of Aviation.
Okay. Yeah, we know
And
we
we've-
can always get those guys.
We know what their thoughts are,
Yeah.
yeah. And then the only other thing we did was force rank our key performance indicators in their relativity to affordability.
Okay. And what were like the top three, or what we choose?
The top three were cost was number one, being construction, operation, and maintenance. Number two was the airport user fee and federal tax implications. And number three was airline ticket prices. Out of the list of the 8 or so that were in the affordability, those were the ones we thought were the most relative to what needed to be addressed.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Let's see. Paul, are you going to do the
I can do the business creation.
business? Okay.
Subcommittee feedback. And actually, I think you guys are all going to benefit that I have to leave in 15 minutes, so I can keep this brief.
Okay.
Self-imposed time
Okay.
constraint.
Paula, could you speak into the microphone thing? And you can slide that whole monitor. There you go.
Like that. Okay, now I'm probably going to be very clear. So we had a good deal of folks when we had our discussion, so we got a lot of good perspective and feedback. I did record, and hopefully this will prevent Bob from having to type this fast. I did record my notes and indicated to the committee. I think we ended up interrelating, I think, a lot of the different topics as we were discussing. I think we definitely met the objectives. I expanded and put some of our assumptions in because we also realized we were lacking some information as we were going through some key things in terms of the stakeholders and the relative priority to business creation in terms of the actual economic contribution of some of the entities, and we certainly wanted to focus on those that had a bigger economic contribution. So one of the, I guess, outstanding items, or one of the assumptions that we made was that kind of the two key stakeholders that impacted business creation were certainly the airlines, right? They are a driver.
I'm sorry, what?
The airlines are one of the primary stakeholders, not only the direct revenue contribution for lease and the other aspects of the fees that they pay into the airport revenue, but just the driver, right? Without passengers, right, we don't have any economic creation. We don't have an airport that employs people or that has concessions, right? They're just the primary driver for all things business-related and revenue-related with the airport. So they certainly rose to the top. And then the next piece, this is where we did make a large assumption, is the overall business community, not just the Kansas City area business community, but the larger business community that would potentially leverage Kansas City for business, for conventions, potentially relocation of business or a major business unit here. We made the assumption that that's a very large part of the economic creation that the airport provides. And that group of stakeholders is pretty broad, right? So there's certainly the broader business community, not just Kansas City area businesses, but national, potentially global businesses, hospitality and event planners, those folks that book conventions, conferences, et cetera, either for businesses or for organizations, and corporations and associations that either facilitate those sort of opportunities or actually are generating those sort of opportunities. We also talked about the chambers of commerce and city councils, and we ended up putting those two hand in hand. Some great feedback from Sheila, Bill, and those folks that have been involved in the civic chambers and councils and things for many, many years, in that those two work very closely with each other. So in terms of our stakeholder list, the chambers of commerce and the business creation aspect are most tightly aligned because the chambers represent the interest of many of the cities and municipalities within Kansas City and surrounding Kansas City. And then there's, even within those, right, there's some subgroups. There's the chambers that are more aligned with a particular group. There's within Kansas City, Missouri, right? So we've kind of listed that as one category, and then non-Kansas City, Missouri, those in the surrounding areas that are impacted or that either benefit or have an impact on the business creation of the airport. Then we've got some related groups that we did list out separately. Again, as we looked at business creation, we're trying to logically group these stakeholders. And then there's some organizations related to the chambers and work closely with the chambers, but we need to call out separately Convention Visitors Association, Economic Development Council, Workforce Development, Full Employment Council, and Sporting Commission. So big organizations that have a substantial impact on bringing business into this community and are reliant on the airport and the surrounding businesses to drive that business and drive those decisions on whether to host particular events and business events here. So we ended up expanding, I guess, the stakeholder list and maybe being a little more specific relative to the business creation perspective. Mm-hmm. The rest of the list is fairly consistent with the other stakeholders and is also fairly consistent in prioritization relative to the revenue contribution to the airport, which were the numbers that we'd received from the airport finance stakeholders when they did it at airport school, right? So if we went back and ranked through, and I think one interesting finding, and this was something that I realized after I was collecting and putting together my notes, is I remembered airport parking being a substantial revenue contributor, and I didn't realize how substantial, right? I mean, relative, I think it was like, I'm gonna quote numbers by memory, which might be bad, but it was like $46 million relative to retail concessions at this time, $5 million, right? So 9 times the parking, and parking is run by a third party. It's somebody that we contract to through KCI. So put them on the stakeholders as a consideration, because if that is going to continue to be a primary revenue generator, we obviously want to make sure that that's considered in optimal configuration. Those folks give us feedback on, how could you make more revenue? Because, there's some very obvious answers there, right? Raise the parking rates, but, right, we need to balance that with affordability and some of the other aspects. But we felt, as in retrospect, right, that may be somebody we want to discuss with separately. So we made some assumptions. I've documented those in addition to some of them that I've listed. Bob, I've documented those, so we don't have to go through those. And then in terms of questions, and this is what we as a committee, I think we didn't formally talk about questions. I think we talked a lot about things we want to understand and the acknowledgement that so many of these things are interrelated. So I think the questions we're trying to ferret out a little bit, separating the actual business creation aspect and try to be a little bit more objective than opinions, because as you start opinions, things start to become interrelated, right? Adaptability, convenience, affordability, all start to be interrelated. So I think if we try to, the questions to further clarify really the business creation aspect, and again, documented these, and I think from each stakeholder, there's a slightly different perspective, but just a sampling, right? And I think retail is a good, I think retail is a really good example, because if you look through their revenue contribution now relative to what it could be, I think there's a lot of questions we can ask them, for example, right, just to kind of highlight, you know, what factors are preventing you from further investing or from making additional revenue, and why, right? What are some of the drivers? Have they done an assessment of their growth potential? Try to get some of those numbers, right, based on potentially, especially retailers have other locations at other airports. A lot of these are broadly owned by larger companies, and trying to get some specific objective numbers on what they actually think they could contribute to changing some of those factors that are preventing them, right, being behind security versus outside of security. And then I think some of the other important questions on, you know, how do they decide if they're going to invest more in a particular airport location in order to drive additional revenue or drive additional business. So that's just a flavor. I think, listed out some different perspective, but I think just generally speaking, trying to drive out, you know, what really would be the value of having some of the things that they perceive to be limitations or factors in the airport corrected. What's the value of that? I think that would give us very good input as to really what are some of the kind of important things in the overall airport consideration, and how those directly relate to the revenue and business producing entities within the airport community.
Okay. So if you were going to indicate kind of your top 3 suggested key performance indicators, what would those be?
Well, so we do, actually, that is one thing
You've done it. You've done a ranking. You did a ranking.
Right, the ranking and the KPIs.
Yes.
Oops. That was one thing we did not get to as a team. So we focused a lot on the stakeholders and the relative questions and getting that information from the stakeholders. So I did an independent ranking that I sent. I made it clear that that was my own ranking.
Okay.
So I don't think we as a subcommittee had come up with the kind of 3 definitive
All right.
KPIs. So that may be a follow-up item that we
maybe a follow-up item
Right.
to make sure that
we're I think consistent and in agreement on what those top 3 are.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Paul.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Kevin, you want to share with us what you and what you
Committee
you
of
do?
one?
Yeah, what you and the other committee members talked about in the way of convenience and adaptability.
Right. One of the first things we looked at was articulating the questions we would ask each key stakeholder, the first one being passengers. Looking at 3 questions. 1, how important are each of the KPIs to you? 2, how well are they being met today? And 3, how could a new facility be more convenient than it is today? And then looked within that question, broke it out by curbside experience, self-check-in, parking, waiting areas, retail, walking around the airport, and then, of course, moving between terminals to change airlines. The second stakeholder we would talk to would be the host, travel-related industries, the retail, the concessionaires, and that is, how is the current configuration as a revenue generator a good partner? What are the upside, downside to the current configuration versus what we might come up with as a new one? Is it conducive to growing the business? Is it convenient to service as a retail provider or other hospitality provider? Looked at freight vendors, which is something that really hasn't been discussed that much, primarily because the cargo area, of course, is away from the current terminal, but you have the services such as the local couriers and that type of thing, the people that use the the scheduled airlines for freight service, what's working right now, what's not working, what would you like to see improved. Fort Leavenworth was a stakeholder as the single largest user of the airport. We wanted to know whether having a USO facility would be important, other amenities that would be helpful to their special needs, and would a centralized check-in perhaps be helpful given the sheer traffic that they as an organization provide. Likewise, to the airlines, what are the best class of facilities and why, based on their experience with us versus other airports?
Kevin, sorry.
Yeah.
Say that again. I missed one word. What are the
best of class facilities?
see.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
Best of class facilities and why? And what would they like to see improved in a new KCI design or within the existing design? TSA, obvious stakeholder, what are the benefits of a new configuration, potential downsides? Fatigue factor, let me back up a second. The first one, what are the benefits of a new configuration? And then also looking at what are the potential downsides. Is there a fatigue factor if we move to larger, more populated checkpoints? There's an obvious benefit from their standpoint of a lower employee need from a strictly salary and cash situation. Some have said that there are higher security risks with higher concentrations of people. I think, in fact, just this past weekend, the situation at LAX, that was brought to light. Likewise, something that wasn't discussed when we met a couple of weeks ago was but we saw it again this weekend with LAX, when you have to lock down an airport because of a security breach, or sometimes when somebody gets through security or they have to lock down, evacuate the entire terminal. Is there a preference from a TSA perspective to having to evacuate an entire airport, or simply a terminal or a section within a terminal? And then we were asked to force rank each of the items within the convenience and adaptability areas. The first one we looked at was convenience. The number one item was the time from airport arrival to gate. Number two is passenger waiting areas, electrical, Wi-Fi, that type of thing. Then came restrooms, the passenger check-in process, parking, retail amenities, luggage handling, curbside amenities, the security checkpoints, nonstop flight options, and regional jet coverage. And under the adaptability heading, we ranked luggage handling, passenger check-in, passenger waiting areas, restrooms, curbside amenities, walking distance, and environmental performance.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. We'll, at the next meeting, when we summarize this, we will have a discussion amongst the whole group, taking this input and kind of validating the key performance indicator priorities, particularly in the convenience area, as far as what are some of the, because it's the most highly charged area, what are the, what's most important? I think your committee did a great job of throwing that out there and creating a straw man to work from. But thank you.
So just to restate something we said earlier, we would like for each of you, and we'll ask Paula separately by email, to send us once again by email the report you've just given. We have what you did before, which has helped, but if you'd give us the changes that were made today, later today, that would be very helpful. Thanks.
So if we go to the next slide, Jay, please. So the next phase of work, as we said the last meeting, is that we've identified the key stakeholders by area, these three major areas, and now we're going to move into outreach and public dialogue. And if we go to the next slide, I kind of saw the notes from the last meeting, and you all have validated this is pretty close to the key stakeholder. If we took maybe with the exception of MoDOT adding there, if we took each of the key stakeholders that each of the groups identified, they would fall on this list. And so we expand a little bit what we show for the civic organizations to include some of the other ones that you mentioned, the EDC and the like. But this would pretty much be our key stakeholders. And what I would suggest kind of even be the order that we would go about really reaching out as this kind of rolls up and snowballs to getting through this phase. And what I want to suggest is kind of a timeline of milestones. So, Jay, if we go to the next slide, taking these stakeholders that we would, at the ensuing meetings, in November 19th meeting, we'll review in some detail and approve kind of the key learnings. And then in December through February timeframe, we would have, we'd start arranging, and we'd actually hold the key stakeholder outreach and public dialogue and update any key learnings that we would learn in the stakeholder outreach, any update, any validating any of our key learnings, and then overlapping a little bit as we've gathered the information from the key people that are going to pay for whatever needs to be done, the airlines, the FAA, getting the input from the economic driving, which is the business. So we have, you know, kind of the order that if anybody was making a financial decision, you'd want to know how it's going to be paid for, what's the cost-benefit relationship, at least from an economic standpoint. And then we move into February, March, citizen town hall meetings, where we propose that we will have highly publicized at some location a couple of citizen outreach town halls where we would share our key learnings and we would communicate in face-to-face forum at probably a couple of citizen town hall meetings our thoughts and make a recommendation, you know, any feedback we get from the citizen town hall, and make a recommendation in April.
So I might mention that, just to acknowledge that at least two of you exchanged emails with us in the last few weeks saying, you know, I think we've heard enough. Let's call the vote and be done with this and submit our recommendation. And at least one additional mentioned that to me this morning. And I think no one feels that urgency more than Dave and I, but I will remind you all what our mission statement said and what we committed to with the mayor when we were appointed. And it reads, the Airport Terminal Advisory Group, after reviewing appropriate relative facts and consulting with key stakeholders, will make a recommendation, and on and on. So if we were to call the question now, we've heard essentially only from the Aviation Department in multiple ways. And it'd pretty much be a strong signal to the community. This is an inside job. We're here to rubber stamp, you know, what the airport recommended to the mayor and council in the beginning. So we believe, and we have confirmed this with the mayor, that it is critical that we stay the course, and what you have just done starts informing that conversation, and we hope to organize this efficiently so that we can get through this. Obviously, the mayor would have preferred, we all would have preferred to be done before the end of the year. But clearly that's not going to be possible to do what we really set out to do and committed to do. And this, we think, is an efficient way to do that, and we ask that all of you, and we'll be asking your colleagues who weren't able to be here today, to stay with us to finish the task that we started. We'd be glad to hear your feedback, but... Well,
I'll add comment to that first. You know, I've heard some good input from the aviation department, and I've talked one off to any number of people who stop me in city and around town. But what I heard with the question, the great questions that you committees have come up with, I want to know the answer to those questions, and before I can even begin to fathom reaching any kind of conclusion. I've not reached a conclusion yet. I want to hear the stakeholders validate what we've heard and what our key learnings are, and only then would I be comfortable taking a position. I'm not there yet.
Any questions?
I guess my only comment would be that, being pretty involved in the community and in the area around the airport, I would say that a lot of these, we ask these questions frequently. I mean, we haven't, not necessarily through an official process, but certainly hearing from some of these stakeholders on a pretty regular basis. I think because we're there geographically, we're right there, which certainly, I mean, maybe puts us at an advantage that we have that kind of continual conversation with some of those stakeholders. So, I was one of those that said, take a straw vote, let's see where we are. But in all fairness, it probably is because I have that kind of opportunity to visit with many of those stakeholders that others around this table may not.
Which is why you're such a valuable person to be on the group, which I agree. Okay. Other thoughts?
Yeah, we had sent out an RFP for a consultant. Where are we in that process? I may have missed it because I wasn't here last week, but is that moving along or is that not moving along?
Well, we've received response, and we're in the process of chasing down, getting some reference checking on that, and that's something we'll probably be in a position to discuss at the next meeting once we've done that, but that's moving along. We're committed still to have a outside consultant, and I expect we'll have a lot more to talk about at the next meeting for that.
I'll just add one comment. In terms of the timeline we have, which I think is reasonable, we had a conversation probably about a month ago about the need to communicate with folks outside this room about what's happening. And I know the Business Journal comes dutifully every meeting, and we appreciate that. But I think it's worth letting people know what we're doing, aside from their ability to read the Journal and also to check in on Channel 2, but figure out a way to sort of let people know that we are still fulfilling our obligations that the mayor tasked us with and as we have self-defined. So there's clarity about the steps moving forward, and our employers know that we're working hard, and whatever constituency we're representing knows that we are still working very hard to make sure we fulfill the mission. That's the only thing I'd add.
It's an important comment, and as I mentioned earlier, I think while at the moment, if you check the website, it's a little embarrassing. Clearly, the staff, led by Chris Hernandez, with support from Jay, is currently at work updating that. And so by our next meeting, it should be current, and everything should be there. And I think Chris will be here to do a demo, or Jay might do that, so everyone here can see how it operates. And it's pretty friendly, frankly, now, but it's just nothing's there.
Right. No, and I think that's fair, and I think that it's not unlike the Affordable Care Act website, that rather than have just passive communications, I think it would be advisable for us to be a little more intentional about it. So if we could be proactive as opposed to driving people towards Channel 2 or to the website to, I go back to the article we talked about or some op-ed, just kind of giving people a heads up about what we're doing. That's just a thought.
Yeah, well, it's a very, very important point, and I want to be candid that there is some tension, which Jay could share, about staff time, about monitoring it to, in fact, have it interactive and to be responsive. So we're trying to figure that out, and we hope to be there soon.
But I think when we go through our key learnings at the next meeting, when we summarize those, our committee talks about them, says, yeah, we agree those key learnings. When we post that's kind of really laying out there. We'll look for many ways to expose those key learnings to the community.
Morning,
We
Mr.
wanna-
Mayor.
We want to welcome the mayor. Mayor, am I in your seat? Oh,
There's
good,
a seat
good.
up here.
How are you? Nice tie.
You too.
Mayor, we're just going over kind of our closing remarks. We had good report outs from three of our groups. We've talked about affordability and business generation and convenience and adaptability, and we've identified the stakeholders that we're going to conduct outreach with around those three primary areas.
Right.
And the timeline. And Jay, if we could just go back one slide, please, to these are the stakeholders that we're going to focus on.
Okay.
And we think that encompasses the three main areas that I just mentioned. If we are able to touch these stakeholders, kind of in this order, with the airlines, the FAA, and the business community focused on
Right. Okay.
affordability and who's going to benefit and what's the return on investment.
Right.
And then the passengers and citizens, once we kind of know that information, then we conduct outreach. And if we go to the next slide, Jay, we kind of the timeline for doing that
Okay.
around the December to February time frame with key stakeholder outreach, and then having a couple of citizen town hall meetings, large forums. We're talking about big groups probably at those in February and March with our announcement of our recommendation in April after those meetings, we think is a reasonable time frame. A little bit longer than what you suggest on the outset, but
And again,
make
I
sure
didn't
that
know
was
what I was
okay.
talking about. Not uncommon. First of all, I'm not here to get into any substantive conversations about what you've done. I purposely stayed away from this commission and every other commission I appoint. I don't want there to ever be a hint that somehow I've guided the conclusion. So I don't come to talk about substantive issues. I don't even come to listen. What I came to do is to thank the people on this commission. You know, a lot of people don't understand the need to do this. I think that we have a very good reason to do exactly what we're doing in terms of appointing commissions. This is like the other commissions that I've appointed, one that handles an extremely important issue that has consequences for this city for decades to come. The first commission that we appointed was the Citizens Commission on Municipal Revenue, which basically set out a program and a map for how we should use our revenue going forward in the future. That is a living document that continues to inform us every time that we consider a vote on any sort of a tax, and it is one that led to the August of 2012 vote that removed certain property taxes and added a 1/2 cent sales tax. This is important stuff. And clearly, we could do this internally if we wanted to. I mean, we could meet with the city manager and other interested people inside and just do it and take the consequences. But we thought it was better to actually involve citizens in making these types of decisions because it affects them. I think that's the way to go and always has been. That is exactly why we have a commission examining whether or not we should change the governance structure for the police department, a situation that's existed for 75 years in this city based on circumstances that existed then, and it is right that the citizens who made the decision well, they're all dead, but the citizens who are going to be living under, for the next 75 years in the city have some say in whether or not that makes sense. Same thing with the Charter Review Commission. Should the charter be changed to reflect changing circumstances? This is an important commission. What happens here will determine the course of one of the city's major hard assets, the airport, for decades to come. What we do now matters. What you guys are doing on this commission is important. It's extremely important. I came to say thank you for doing it, because without having this level of interest, involvement, engagement, input, study, we would get a less than complete result. And what I'm asking you to do is hang on a little longer. I know it's a little longer than I projected, but then again, I told the Citizens Commission on Municipal Revenue that I thought it'd take a year. I was wrong. When they got into it, they saw how complicated it was. It took a year and a quarter, year and a third. But they did the job right. They produced a document, they produced a report and some guidelines that we refer to whenever we're looking at revenue issues. And that is what we want citizens to do. They did that without us changing it. We didn't go in and tell them how to write it. They came to their own conclusions. This is an important issue in this city. Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody thinks that they know the answer. But at the end of the day, you're going to be the jury. And a lot of times people look at jury decisions and they don't like what the jury did or said. But there's one thing I can tell anybody about a jury. They're the only ones who were there every day, listened to every word, read every page, did everything, and reached a conclusion. That's what you are. Now, the decisions that you reach are up to you based on the evidence and information that you have heard and seen and done and been to. But I do ask that you hold on a little longer, do the whole enchilada, get everything out there, gather all the facts, good, bad, and ugly, and then do your job at the end in terms of producing a recommendation of which way you think we ought to go. And when that's done, believe me, I will stand up for your recommendations. We will talk about them, but I will support your efforts 100% because you've been here all the time. You're doing it every day. I can't tell you enough how much this city appreciates and needs the type of service that you've rendered to this point. This is what engaged democracy looks like. This is engagement in city government. This is how people have their voices heard. And I just want to thank you for letting other people speak through you and for you doing the hard work of gathering the facts and doing the work to get this up to this point. So I'm not here to tell you anything more than that. Thank you. Encourage you to stick with it and to explain to you how valuable your service is and continues to be. It's absolutely great that you're doing this. And I know it's a grind, but welcome to my world.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, chairs.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
I want to second the mayor's appreciation to all of you committee members. And we also thank all the members in the gallery who have attended our meetings and have provided us some key input that we listen to and really try to adapt to. And so we hope that you'll continue to provide that feedback and will only be even have greater opportunities to provide the feedback in the meetings to come. So we thank you very much. And the next meeting on November 19th is a very important meeting, and we'll make sure that we have a quorum at that meeting because we're going to deliberate on our key learnings. Bob, anything else you want to add?
Thanks again for your great work, and we'll see you on the 19th. You'll probably hear from us before then.
Thank you.